Russian oil giant Lukoil is panicking over Trump's latest round of sanctions. Just what are they resorting to? And is it too little too late to help the Russian economy? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. By the way, guys, if you can, become a member over at combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description. And, of course, give us a follow on Spotify. All right. So Lukoil. It's a bad day to be a Russian oil giant. And, boy, couldn't have happened to a nicer company run by Russian oligarchs. Now, after U.S. sanctions, it's going to be forced to sell its overseas assets. The company said Monday after it is hit with U.S. sanctions over the war in Ukraine, including this is a reflection of Trump's frustration that Moscow hadn't halted its continuing offensive. And of course, company stock is actually up just a little bit on news that they're going to get a badly needed infusion of cash. And the sanctions, of course, are freezing all Rosneft and Lukoil assets in the United States and prohibits U.S. companies from doing business with them. The two companies account for 55% of Russia's oil output, were also put on a list of sanctioned entities, a registry followed by many countries and feared in the business world. So the firms, of course, have 1 month to cut ties or face secondary sanctions, which would deny them access to U.S. banks, traders, shippers, and insurers. I'm sort of fascinated. I really would have assumed that Rosneft and Lukoil would have still been sanctioned, but I suppose it's in part because as we've talked about, these companies, the oil sanctions were a price cap. It didn't say that you couldn't sell. It just said that you couldn't sell above a certain price. And it seems like Trump has said, okay, well, we're going to crack down even harder on these individual companies specifically, right? Instead of just saying not just you can't sell beyond a certain price, now it's you literally can't sell at all. And you can see in the stock price that Lukoil has not had a great time, right, with this price cap. Bear in mind, this is a 1-year chart, but in the same 12 months, remember, it is down nearly 18%, but more importantly, the Russian ruble that it's denominated in has also fallen by 10%. So the real number probably looking more like 25, 26%. And this is, again, this is the Russian economy. This isn't just a part of it. The Russian economy is an oil company, right? It is the joke is that the Russian economy is a gas station masquerading as a country, right? Let's see, what percentage of Russia GDP is oil and gas? I mean, I would suspect, I've heard that it's as much as a third, right? Because again, oil and gas are about 20% of GDP, but account for 30 to 50% of Russian budget revenues. So again, if you're talking about the fact that it's 20% of the actual GDP, but then if it's also 50% of the budget, right? So what percentage of Russian GDP is government spending? Well, that answer is 40% of Russia's GDP is government spending. So you can add another 50% onto that. So again, the Russian economy entirely, right? If you pull out oil and gas, you end up with a huge glaring hole, right, in the Russian federal budget, which you're already seeing, by the way, come into effect. Why? Because despite a massive manpower shortage, nearly half a dozen Russian regions are actually being forced to slash signing bonuses. Now, remember, in Russia, the signing bonuses are funded in part from regions and in part from the federal government. So in January 2025, these regions doubled their enlistment bonus from 1 million to 2 million rubles, which is absurdly high. Local officials said that would remain in place through the end of the year, but the new figure has been dropped now to the minimum level that Vladimir Putin recommended a regional government pays its new recruits. And the federal government, of course, provides a matching payment. Now, the other regions, like Tatarstan, Chushiya, or Mariel, are quietly cutting enlistment bonuses to the 400,000 ruble minimum, a 60% cut. A huge, actually, that is a massive cut, going from 2 million rubles to $5,000. Yeah, so you're talking about a what's that, 80% cut. And other regions have also lowered their Army contract payments this year. Now, here's the thing. The question is, on one hand, right, economics tells us that if you want more recruits, you simply pay more money over and over again. But we've talked about the fact that the Russian budget is running through its recruitment budget too fast, and there's not the funds to backfill them, right? But the more interesting story is that if Russia was meeting its recruitment numbers, they would be touting it, right? They would be shouting it from the rooftops, but they're not. In fact, if they do indeed claim that they're meeting their recruitment numbers or exceeding them, well, why would they need to lower these payments? And why wouldn't they tout it on media, right? Authorities have widely promoted the payment hikes in regional media campaigns. The reductions have gone unannounced, surfacing only after the decrees were published on official government websites. So that is really interesting that Russia is trying to not tell anyone that the bonuses have been cut, right? So, like, it's not the action you would take, right? And according to, again, at least one analysis here I found from July, that Russian recruitment is actually slowing down from the 40,000 a month from March and April to below 30,000 in May and June. So if this were true, if recruitment was slowing down, right? And this is, of course, based on different statements. Regional budget, according to regional budget data, federal budget data, and Medvedev's just sort of prognostications. Even Medvedev is claiming a lower number so far in 2025. This is semi-annual. And so I think this is really interesting because you can see the recruitment is falling, and yet Russian federal budget data says they're getting less, right? Here's the recruitment estimates per quarter. You can see that, again, you're looking at inferring it from Russia's finance ministry. Again, regional and federal budget data largely in alignment. Something really weird happening in the fourth quarter. But then you can see that recruitment actually is on the decline, right? And it's unclear, again, if Russian recruitment from this regional budget data is continuing to operate as it should. Look, you're seeing more declines here, right? Highs really being reached in December 2024, March 25, April 25. You're seeing these declines, and in all likelihood, right, we're going to see a further decline, or we're seeing a further decline because, as we've talked about, the Russian economy is like really just kind of in a bad state. And normally, a bad economy is great for military recruiters. But again, according to some data, right, what's funny is that Russian Defense Ministry claiming that a peace deal could be near and urging citizens to get their millions before peace comes, right? Which is weird. Russia's recruitment drive losing steam despite record bonuses. This is from October of this year. But again, some of these regions have lots of money and are paying out big bonuses, but lots of regions are paying out smaller bonuses, right? So again, I think what you're seeing here is part of this Russian regional crisis, this Russian economic crisis, that some regions still have the money to fund these, but some regions do not, depending on what the source of the tax base of these industries are. One source in northern Irkutsk Oblast, officials said recruitment has been stalled for months. Most inquiries focus on financial benefits like debt forgiveness, loan deferments, and educational privileges for children. And again, we're seeing that there's just not a lot of people in Russia willing to sign up and take these kinds of payments. So I think this is, again, I argue that this is a sign of the dilemma facing the Russian Federation, where they need to generate more money. Some regions are continuing to ramp up recruitment bonuses. I mean, you see 3.2 million is a third more, or 50% more than the 2 million from these other regions. So you could have just kind of a split where some regions are all in on recruitment and some regions are simply saying, no, there's no reason for us to do it. But I think the bigger function is really about the economy and the labor market. Normally, falling economy, high unemployment, easier to get recruits. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing recruitment numbers fall even as the Russian economy falls. So I think this is actually just a tax-based issue that these regions can't afford to continue to pay out these bonuses. Anyway, guys, we're going to keep you posted on this as we learn more. Be sure to hit subscribe. Thanks to Sergey Zinchenko, Thomas Anderson, William Alexenko, Georgiev, AL90, and all of our Lieutenant Tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.